and welcome to this special broadcast on India at the 16th G20 Summit. I'm Munun Bhattacharya. It's 7 p.m. here in New Delhi and 3:30 in the afternoon in Rome, which is hosting the 16th G20 Summit today. And tomorrow, we are bringing to you exclusive reports from our correspondent in Rome and a distinguished panel of experts who will break it all down for us. Also, over the next 2 hours, we will get you the latest from Rome and also give you a flavor of all the developments that are panning out in Rome, both in the multilateral as well as bilateral contexts. The first G20 summit hosted by Italy is in progress in Rome. The heads of state and government of the world's major economies, together with invited countries and representatives of international and regional organizations, have joined hands to address several important topics on the global agenda. The summit represents the culminating moment of the intense work carried out during the whole year of the Italian G20 presidency through ministers' meetings, Sherpa meetings, working groups and engagement groups. The activity of the Italian presidency has been based on 3 interconnected pillars of action, which you know by now: people, planet and prosperity. The first day of the summit featured an intense program, including the first session on global economy and global health. The G20 is the international forum that brings together the world's major economies. Its members account for more than 80% of the world's GDP, 75% of global trade, and 60% of the population on the planet. The forum has met every year since 1999 and includes, since 2008, a yearly summit with the participation of the respective heads of state and government. Prime Minister Narendra Modi had arrived at the Roma Convention Center in Rome for the G20 summit, where he was received by Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi. India is a founding member of the G20. It has always raised issues pertaining to developing countries, low and middle income countries. India is highlighting issues ranging from global health governance and tax evasion to climate change in the summit. Italian Prime Minister receiving Prime Minister Narendra Modi as the G20 got underway today. The 16th summit of the G20. Italy has the presidency of the 16th G20 summit. An important development has taken place on Friday, that is on 29th October 2021. G20 finance and health ministers met for their first joint meeting under the Italian G20 presidency. The meeting took place on the eve of the G20 leaders summit and it was co-chaired by Daniel Franco, Italian Minister for Economy and Finance, and Roberto Speranza, who is the Italian Minister of Health. Now, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman participated in the G20 joint finance and health ministers meeting in Rome on Friday. They took up long-term challenges in pandemic prevention, preparedness and response, and strengthening global health financing governance. Finance ministers called for a swift and strong multilateral cooperation, effective governance and sustained financing for pandemic preparedness, such that the world is not caught unprepared again for future pandemics. Finance and health ministers agreed on a joint communique. Let's now take a look at some of the salient features. Well, the G20 has established a joint finance and health task force to strengthen pandemic prevention, preparedness and response, focusing on bringing the pandemic under control everywhere as soon as possible. The focus is also on strengthening collective efforts to prepare for prevention, detection and response to future pandemics. Besides that, the focus is also on strengthening global cooperation so that international community is better prepared in case of future outbreaks. Also, the focus is on promoting exchange of experiences and best practices. Members have also committed to taking all steps that are needed to vaccinate at least 40% of the population in all countries by 2021 end, and members have also committed to taking all steps that are needed to vaccinate at least 70% of the population in all countries by mid-2022 as envisaged by the WHO. Members also committed to boosting supply of vaccines, medical countermeasures, that is other measures like drugs and diagnostics and other inputs in developing countries. Members also committed to removing relevant supply constraints and financing constraints. Besides that, the G20 is set to continue to support access to COVID-19 tools accelerator called as Act A, an extension of its mandate into 2022. Members acknowledged the need for adequate, sustainable and better coordinated financing for PPR, which is Pandemic Prevention, Preparedness and Response. Also, members acknowledged the need to address potential financial gaps. Besides that, members acknowledged the need to mobilize appropriate mix of existing multilateral financing mechanisms. Members also acknowledged the need to explore setting up of new financing mechanisms. The task force, in fact, is initially jointly chaired by the 2021 and 2022 G20 presidencies, which you know by now, Saudi Arabia and Italy. Also, task force will report to health and finance ministers in early 2022, and the task force will be assisted by secretariat housed at WHO, because the G20 doesn't have a permanent secretariat, and the task force will receive support of the World Bank as well. So this is one of the big takeaways from the G20 Summit and some of the pre-summit engagements. Also, frontline health workers joined world leaders as they posed for the G20 Summit's traditional family photo to pay tribute to their work during the COVID-19 pandemic. A rather thoughtful gesture by the G20 leaders sharing the stage with frontline health workers who put their lives on the line to save citizens across the world. On the second day of his visit to Italy, Prime Minister Narendra Modi met Pope Francis in the Vatican City for the first time today. Prime Minister was received by senior members of the papal government. The meeting with Pope Francis was scheduled only for 20 minutes but went on for an hour. During today's meeting, the two leaders discussed the COVID-19 pandemic and its consequences for people across the world. They also discussed the challenge posed by climate change. Prime Minister briefed the Pope about the ambitious initiatives taken by India in combating climate change, as well as India's success in administering 1 billion COVID-19 vaccination doses. His Holiness appreciated India's assistance to countries in need during the pandemic. PM Modi also invited the Pope to visit India. It may be recalled here that the last papal visit happened in 1999 when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the Prime Minister of India and Pope John Paul II had come over. Now it is during PM Modi's prime ministerial term that the Pope has been invited to visit India. PM Modi was accompanied by NSA Ajit Doval and External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar. PM Modi arrived in Italy on Friday to participate in the two-day G20 Summit at the invitation of Italy's Prime Minister Mario Draghi.
I will come there. Thank you very much. And,
Your Holiness, no, for the candle stand.
thank you.
It's very specially made from my country.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is your most favorite subject, climate. What type of initiative I have taken in my country? I have given a detailed account.
Questo per lei, questo è un medaglio fatto qui in Vaticano. Vaticano specially बनाया गया है आपके लिए.
Wow.
Si dice l'abbondanza, il grano, l'uva,
Wow.
tutto. E si dice il deserto, traduci tu, il deserto diventerà un giardino.
अंगूर है उससे भर जाएगा.
Wow.
Peace. I have seen for you today.
Oh. Yes, sir.
And you pray for
I'll always remember. I'll be happy to receive you. Yeah. It's a great honor.
Thank you very much for your visit. I'm happy.
It's an honor for me.
Very happy.
And I would like to see you in India.
Yes.
It's my great honor to receive you there.
Yes. Thank you very much. And pray for me, don't forget. I talk to you.
Your prayers are always giving me strength.
Later, Prime Minister Narendra Modi took to Twitter and said, had a very warm meeting with Pope Francis. I had the opportunity to discuss a wide range of issues with him and also invited him to visit India. So let's now discuss the developments that have taken place so far in the G20 Summit. What are the other sessions that are expected to take place? The meeting that the Prime Minister had with Pope Francis, as well as several bilateral meetings that the Prime Minister has had on the sidelines of the G20 Summit in Rome. Joining us are Manjeev Puri, former Indian ambassador, and Professor Sriram Cholia, a foreign affairs expert, is also with us. Ambassador Puri, I'll begin with you. We know that over the years, the mandate of G20 has expanded. It is a premier grouping for economic international cooperation, yet we've seen at least two extraordinary summits that have taken place in the last 2 years, one on Afghanistan recently and the other on the COVID-19 pandemic. What's your sense in terms of what is it that can be expected this time around? We're already looking at a lot of action with regard to global economy, with regard to health. There is expected to be focus on climate change, sustainable development, and several other issues. What's your sense on what to expect this time around?
Sorry, I was dead. Munmun, thank you very much for the question. Look, the G20 is not only the premier economic getting together of the largest countries in the world. Let's also be clear. It is the forum which brings together countries from both the developed and the developing world, the largest and most important countries. So in that sense, it's a player, a stakeholder of a very high order. And for most people, they would say that, you know, if you have the nod of the G20, you can really get things going in a global order. So let's understand that quite clearly. You mentioned COVID. You know, there is no way that there can be a major global meeting of this kind. And COVID is not at the center of it. Let us remember that the last G20 summit could not even be held in person and had to be held virtually, the one that Saudi Arabia hosted. So this is the first time that the leaders are coming together after the COVID pandemic, and we have seen what it has done to the world. It's not only that on the health front, you have taken huge hits, large number of people losing their lives, huge number of cases, not just in the poor developing world, but in the richest countries of the world. At the same time, what have we seen in terms of the global economy? A downturn that has almost never been seen before. Therefore, the G20 had to be active on it. And I'm so glad that today the finance ministers and the health ministers in a joint get-together met and resolved to take several actions. That some of these actions are taking place now, well, you know, that's the nature of global plurilateralism and coming together. You mentioned another point, the thing about the G20 meeting on Afghanistan. Now, let's also be very clear in terms of global political happenings in the last couple of years. What has happened in Afghanistan and its portent for the world can hardly be lost on anyone else in the world. And in the G20, you have the United States. Let's also put the point across. You have China, you have Russia, you have all the other major players. So the question of their leadership not discussing Afghanistan just doesn't arise. And more than anything else, at the moment, there is this very urgent issue of a huge humanitarian crisis, which appears to be looming above Afghanistan. And frankly, these countries would have to find some kind of way there. The Afghanistan government, you know, is a government which doesn't, you know, lend itself to comfort of the rest of the world, which believes in a certain way in which the world must move. But something has to be done. A country of 50 million people, they just can't be left to their own and face the vagaries of nature. So I think these things are very important, and I believe this summit will certainly focus on these. But in my opinion, other than COVID and sustainable development, food security, all of these issues, one of the critical issues that the leaders will certainly talk about is climate change. And the reason I say so is because the World Climate Summit, the UNFCCC, is meeting just the day after the G20, and most of the major leaders are going there. So this will certainly be the stage setter for what will happen at the UN negotiations.
Fair enough. So this would infuse momentum going into the World Leaders COP26 Summit in Glasgow, UK. Professor Cholia, is India increasingly demonstrating global leadership at the G20, representing the voice particularly of all the developed nations as well as less developed countries on a host of issues, be it COVID-19 pandemic, how to tackle it, how to prevent future pandemics or respond to them, or other issues like economic recovery or enabling smooth international travel or food security, to name a few?
Yeah, very much so, Moon. In fact, the Twitter feed of the G20 Italy, the host country, said this, today that the summit is starting, and they showed 3 frames. One had the Ursula von der Leyen, the European, one of the heads of the European institutions. There was one of Joe Biden, the US president, and third one was of our Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And they had this frame on for about half a minute on the tweet, simply to say that the world leaders have arrived. So why did they choose these 3 and not any others? One, because Prime Minister has gone in person. There are some who are not even there in person. Xi Jinping is not there. The Japanese apparently are not coming, and a few others are missing. President Putin is not there in person. So for the Italian presidency, to have heads of state be there in person is itself matters. But even among the ones who are present, there are quite a few have come. They highlighted Prime Minister Modi along with Biden and with Ursula von der Leyen. So it shows the primacy of India apart from the major Western powers. India is the most wanted country there, much more than even China, because we are fulfilling our commitments to all the G20 goals much faster and in a more responsible way than even China is doing. So I think, like you said, the 3 pillars on which this summit is happening, they are looking up to India. And India, already our Sherpa, Minister Piyush Goyal, has been there and has been engaging with his counterparts. And the preparation has been such that, our agenda items, our suggestions have been already incorporated. Minister Goyal has mentioned that on COVID, for example, India's position is that the vaccine should be treated as global public goods, which means like the environment. It's a universal need. It should not be confined only to rich countries. So far, the record doesn't show generosity by rich countries. They have hoarded vaccines. They have been very selfish. They are even going for booster doses, 3rd shots. They have not shared it with Africa and with the rest of the world. We have been generous. We had a setback because of our 2nd wave. We are now again restarting our vaccine supply to the needy countries. So we are setting the example on this, and we are saying, so the targets you mentioned, Moon, if the G20 is saying 40% vaccination by December for the whole world, 70% for the whole world by mid-2022, it's an ambitious target. And for that to be achieved, India will have to play a big role, and I think the world is looking forward. Even Pope Francis, you're mentioning, who met the PM, appreciated the fact that we are doing so much for the world during COVID-19. So that's one. On environment also, our line has been climate finance is important, climate justice, and as Ambassador Puri was saying, in the run-up to the COP26 Summit in Glasgow, that's right after the G20, again, India is being looked up to as a provider of solutions. Apart from the issue about carbon emissions and renewables and all those things, one of the things PM is highlighting this time is Indian lifestyle. We are simple people. We don't consume a lot of energy. Since centuries, we've had this tradition, going back to ancient India, of living in consonance with nature, not in opposition to nature. And he's going to promote that Indian lifestyle as something that needs to be adopted. Yoga had been adopted once before, but this is something much bigger, more comprehensive understanding of a way of living And I think that's what he's going to highlight. And on the economy, our line is, the fiscal support, all these monetary measures to keep the economy on the recovery path must be continued. Poor farmers, we are saying there's no way we will be forced to lift subsidies or minimum support prices and for such things for them, because their livelihoods are at stake. This year, PM has been appreciated on the world stage for providing free food for 800 million people during the pandemic. We did that at home. We have now vaccinated 100 crore people, Monmon. So if you add up all that, we've got the statistics, we've got the ideas, and we've got the legitimacy to take the lead at the G20.
Absolutely, and a number of bilateral meetings have also taken place. Each of the points that you've made, Professor Chaulia, are extremely important, and we will go further in depth into them. But before that, on the meeting that Prime Minister Narendra Modi had with Pope Francis at the Vatican, Ambassador Puri, the last time an Indian Prime Minister met the Pontiff in the Vatican was over 20 years ago, after Atalji, as Prime Minister of India, met Pope John Paul II. How significant was this meeting to your mind?
Munmun, I think we should be very clear. This meeting was not just a symbolic meeting simply because you went to Rome, and you should call on the Pontiff there, especially since the Vatican City is, in a sense, located in Rome. This is very significant. Let's understand some of the dynamics. One, India has a large Christian population, in fact, a large Catholic population. There are cardinals from India who are members of the core group that leads the Roman Catholic Church. The Prime Minister's meeting the Pontiff is important in that context in itself. His inviting him is something which is absolutely in order, given the fact of the population here with us, are in the kind of country we are, diverse, a country which embraces everyone. So this was very important. But then let me make one other point. The Pope has been extremely engaged with the issue of climate change. And I think the Prime Minister got this absolutely right in talking to him about this subject, presenting him that publication on the climb of India, because the Pontiff has a voice which does get heard, especially among the developed world and by the developed world, right across the world. It is a moral voice, but a voice with a great deal of force, and a voice which really leads to people trying to do things and try to marry things and take things forward. So I think this was a meeting which was particularly important. I'm glad the meeting happened, and I'm of course very happy of the invitation to the Pope to come to India. But the substantiveness of the meeting is what we should understand, quite apart from the fact that it is, of course, a clear signal of the kind of country we are, all embracing, diversity included, and the Pope is an important element of our own population in that sense of the term.
Absolutely. Professor Chaulia, do you agree with him that this meeting is not just a reflection of India's pluralistic traditions and the fact that there is equal faith and equal respect for all faiths in India, but also the fact that significant issues were discussed, like combating climate change as well as recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yes, Munmun. In fact, the public feed, we could hear the Pope telling the Prime Minister that he's so thankful for so many things that India is doing, And the fact is, the Pope has run into rough weather with a lot of Western countries where there are very hardline, populist regimes that have closed the door on immigrants and have been violating the Paris Agreement commitments. So the Pope has had a tough time getting across, but with Prime Minister Modi, he has got actually a like-minded world leader, because Prime Minister Modi, completely ticks all the boxes as far as the Pope's values are concerned. And Catholics are safe in India. There's no issue with them. And they are, very well protected and living as equal citizens. So I think from that point of view, the invitation is also important. It's good to show the world that we are a multicultural society. And on global issues also, I think the Pope wants more world leaders to take his side and to canvass for, these kind of liberal ideas. And I think that's where he's finding a lot of commonality with the PM, because on these issues, it's hard these days to find consensus, and the Pope has often been isolated. So I think the PM's visit, he really appreciated. Joe Biden, the US president, has also met the Pope. And, I think the Pope looks for more allies to promote his vision. So if he's coming to India, or if he will come to India, we hope so, It's not to spread Christianity or simply to protect Catholics. It's more importantly to engage with the world's largest democracy on issues that matter to him. The Pope is a moral leader in the world. Prime Minister Modi is a political leader. So I think this is a right kind of combination, and together if they work for global solutions, for global governance issues, which are very dear to both of them, it will be a win-win, because the Vatican is a moral player, and it matters on the world stage when the Pope says something that he's being supported by the leader of the world's largest democracy.
Right. Let's now go back to the G20 agenda. Well, coming to you, Ambassador Puri, on the question of climate change, there were many points that Professor Cholia had put forth on the policy stances of India and how it is representing the developing world as well as less developed countries. India is calling for commensurate long-term concessional climate finance. We know that every year $100 billion had to be committed by the developed world to the developing world. Nothing of that has come through so far. India has also been calling for affordable and sustainable technology access to the developing world. It's also calling for adopting sustainable lifestyles and responsible consumption patterns suited to eliminating waste. Considering these policy stances that India has been pushing in the G20 negotiations, how do you look at India's leadership on these issues, and do you expect some concrete outcomes, if not at the G20 summit, then at the World Leaders COP26 summit?
Munmun, it's difficult for me to tell you what kind of outcomes will come out, for the very simple reason that, rightly so, governments have to hold some of these cards to their chest. Now, let's be very clear. India has been and is and will remain a major player for taking climate action. So whether we talk about renewable energy, our suo moto target of 450 gigawatts in the next 10 years is absolutely tremendous. Electrifying the Indian railways, making them 100% electric, our action on the National Hydrogen Mission, all those are absolutely exemplary. What we've done with the International Solar Alliance, what we've done in terms of adaptation, in terms of the Global Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, all these are absolutely exemplary, and I think the world knows what they are. But, let's be very clear. This climate change international negotiations are, of course, about asking you to take domestic action, but they are essentially a kind of power play. I think we should be very clear on that. They are also about global burden sharing. Why? Because climate change is essentially a global problem, and you need to find global solutions, although you have to act domestically and you have to act locally. Now, the G20 is perhaps very important. Why do I say so? The G7, which is the entire developed part of the G20, met in May. They passed a number of resolutions trying to say that they will try to do more than $100 billion, what they promised in 2009 and haven't delivered. But more important than that is this one set of buzzwords. Try to do net zero by 2050, and not just as a global target, but a target that every country in the world commits to. And there, the G20 is certainly the most critical, because the smaller countries certainly are going to be around on board. And it is within the G20 that the developing countries are the ones under the most egregious pressure from the developed world. This has nothing to do with the fact that the developed world has contributed nearly 2/3 of the carbon emissions which are stored in the atmosphere. It has nothing to do with the fact that the developed world continues to be the largest emitter. It has nothing to do with that. It is simply, there is a burden sharing shift, differentiation. Well, that's the end of the game that is being pushed, and to get developing countries to do more than what many of us would say is their fair share of this particular thing.
Absolutely.
I think without any doubt, we must understand that there is a certain amount of, let me say, pulls and pressures on India. Without doubt, the fact that the Chinese president himself is not there, it lends to a certain kinds of methodology in the way you interact, etc. So the G20 is going to be an important forum. What its communique says of climate change, we will have to watch, because I'm sure this is something which is possibly even still being negotiated and would need to be discussed at the level of the leaders, unless they've sorted it out and simply kept it away from the radar screen. And then the Prime Minister goes to Glasgow and he will be speaking there. After which you have this nearly 2 weeks of negotiation. And it is that which will result in what the UNFCCC will say. Of course, these are all UN resolutions we work towards. And India's commitment to climate change, the fact is that it is in leadership role. There is no doubt about it. But what the world wants you to do is something which I would say transcends climate justice. And they would really like you to take on much more than your fair share. They want to back down from their own fair share of doing action. Well, that's the nature of global interactions. So as we become the largest country in the world, one of the third largest economy, we're on the way to the third largest economy in the world. I'm afraid the pulls and pressures to do, let me put it like this, more than your fair share become extreme. And these are things that governments have to weigh. And they would certainly be weighed by the government. And I take decisions which are plus for India, both strategically as well as in terms of our development imperative.
Absolutely. What you are pointing out makes perfect sense, that there is a common responsibility, but importantly, there is also a differentiated responsibility. The countries that haven't peaked yet in terms of industrial development, they need a longer road ahead before they can commit to net zero transmissions and net zero emissions, so to say. And China, we know, has said that they will not be achieving carbon neutrality before 2060, which is of course something that doesn't inspire much confidence as far as the fight against climate change is concerned. Let me bring the viewers up to speed with what is happening. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is also holding various meetings with leaders on the sidelines of the G20 Summit. A short while back, the Prime Minister of UK had tweeted that this year's G20 Summit has begun in the beautiful city of Rome, and the world's largest economies, the major economies, must take action to end the pandemic and preserve the planet. And there's a picture that has been tweeted of Prime Minister Narendra Modi with the UK Prime Minister, with the Canadian Prime Minister, as well as with the Australian Prime Minister. And before that, there was a bilateral meeting, I understand, between Prime Minister Modi as well as the Singaporean Prime Minister. And that was in fact preceded with a meeting that the Prime Minister had with French President Emmanuel Macron, and these meetings continue on the sidelines of the 16th G20 Summit in Rome. Let me take the point on combating climate change further with Professor Chaulia. Professor Chaulia, there is an important point that Prime Minister Narendra Modi made, and here of course are pictures of the warm exchanges that Prime Minister had with various world leaders. Joe Biden, the US President for one, Emmanuel Macron, French President, was another leader that Prime Minister met, and of course Justin Trudeau. You also saw a picture of Justin Trudeau. Right now you're looking at some warm exchanges between three leaders, President Biden, French President Emmanuel Macron, as well as Justin Trudeau, who has come back to power. Well, let's, on these pictures, if you're staying on the pictures, Professor Chaulia, your thoughts on the characteristic ease that we see in Prime Minister's approach towards various leaders in all settings, bilateral settings or in pull-asides, etc.
Well, he's a master at building personal friendships, famous personal chemistry with world leaders. And even when there are regime changes in a lot of key countries, he continues to straddle the ideological divides of those countries and build these friendships with whoever occupies the seat of a president or a prime minister in a country that is of which has great value to India. So I think that's a real skill. He has said before that he believes that Prime Minister has his own theory of international relations. He says it is built on the basis of trust, Vishwas, and he often says that until you build trust with your peers, you cannot really get much done as far as solving global problems is concerned. So the bilaterals on the sidelines of G20, or let's say the UN General Assembly debates, these are very, very important, and therefore I think we schedule them in advance and we look up to them. These are not like very structured dialogues with a full delegation level talks and all that, but it helps to simply renew these friendships. And I tell you, the friendships matter. Many times you find that there may be some wrinkles in the bilateral ties with certain countries. Then the fact that the topmost leaders see eye to eye and actually are embracing each other means a lot. And Prime Minister is quite strategic with this. I mean, it's an art he has cultivated over time. And, he is very spontaneous in diplomacy, and that really matters. Even with the Pope, you saw that. And even with the workers, the health workers who are standing for the group photo in Rome, along with the world leaders, the COVID, the ones who are on the frontline workers, he was, chatting with them and, patting them on their backs. This is the world leadership. You need that spontaneity and that warmth. There are some who are very stiff and who cannot really get across, and then you have trouble. And when you have trouble, there's no way to call someone directly on the hotline and say, my friend, let's sort this out. So I think it's very important for forward movement of relations. If one reason why India is respected in the world is not only the policy changes and the achievements and all the transformations we have seen in the last 7.5 years, it's also because of the Prime Minister's personality and the charm, And so it is a charm offensive. Nobody can beat him at this game. And, even I remember when Donald Trump was the US president, he was a very awkward guy to embrace or to hold hands with. But Prime Minister did it for the national interest. So
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
this friendship diplomacy or personal diplomacy in itself is one of the pillars of of India's rise in the world, and it cannot be discounted. I mean, people sometimes say it's all structural issues and the overlapping interests that really matter to build foreign relations. But the icing on the cake is this personal chemistry, and it cannot be discounted.
Absolutely. I'll take your views on the issue of climate change, but before that, I'll come to Ambassador Puri. Ambassador, there is a view in certain quarters that if not in the G20 summit, then in the upcoming COP26 summit, there could be a greater possibility of various countries committing to longer term targets, that is the targets by say 2050, and may lose sight of the medium term targets or the short term targets. And various reports indicate that there is a need to act now and act faster, especially for those countries that are historical emitters, and not pass over the responsibility to the future generations, because then they face a disproportionate burden to act on climate change. What do you think is going to happen? I mean, could there be a proclivity for various countries to say not now but later?
Monmohan, thank you very much. That's a great question. And let me tell you, this is a question that you've asked because it is the deliberate attempt that is happening. It isn't just like that it is happening. I mean, those who need to act now are telling you that they will act in 30 years, and those who should be acting in 30 or more than that years are being told start acting now. Look, let's be very clear. Global action on climate change is something that every country must realize. And I hope and I believe that most countries, barring one or two, let's leave them out, I won't name them here on your show here. Barring them, almost every country is taking major action that it can itself. And India is very much in the lead. Look what we are doing on renewables, what we are doing in terms of the hydrogen mission, and so on and so on. However, because the problem is quintessentially global, what a country does in its atmospheric area and what it has done in the past has an impact on you today. Let's look at a simple thing. COVID-19 resulted in the largest lockdown or slowdown in the global economy seen for decades. And yet we are seeing some of the most devastating fires, floods, cyclones, etc. Why? Because it is not just current emissions, but what stands in the atmosphere, what is locked there for years on end is what is impacting. So you are absolutely right. We should be quite clear that these are certainly parts of the attempt. But, let me make this point. Countries are in the game of power in the world. And the UNFCCC negotiations painted on the platform of global good. And yes, they are about global good. And that's exactly what we would wish to see. They are also about the same business, about negotiations, getting the best deal for myself, trying to shift the burden of greater action on the other. And that's certainly what will happen. Now, India will certainly stress on the fact that developed countries need to take action faster, quicker, and indeed now. In fact, I have written somewhere that if you want the world to be at carbon neutral 2050, then lots of developed countries would have to be carbon neutral well before that. But you know what the facts are? only 3 or 4 countries have committed to become carbon neutral in the developed world before 2050. That's the reality of life. And that's what we are looking at. So these negotiations certainly will be hard negotiations. And we hope that the directions will be set, that those who can do much more and who have a responsibility to it will agree to act. And I think that's important. We too are very conscious that we have to do our bit for it, not only in terms of mitigation. Let me make it very clear. There's the entire question of adaptation, which for a country like India with the kind of vulnerabilities we have is of an absolutely tremendous order. But we are at it and we remain committed because it is in our national interest to remain committed to that. We need some degree of carbon space, policy space. That's something that I am sure that we will put across to the world. How negotiations pan out, Munmun, they are negotiations.
Absolutely. And who knows it better than you as somebody who's led climate change negotiations from the Indian side in the past. Well, Professor Chaulia, your quick comment before we shift focus to pandemic control, preparedness and response on whether you expect India and other countries to announce updated NDCs. India has already said that it seems to be well on track to not just achieve its nationally determined contributions that it had projected in Paris in COP21, but go well beyond that.
India is the only country, Munmun, PM has mentioned this, that among the G20 members, India is the only country which is on track and which is ahead of schedule to meet its nationally determined contributions to combating climate change. And I think this, there's been some, the ambassador talked about the pressure. The pressure is, they are saying that we should also announce the so-called net zero target date or year, for carbon neutrality. Now, this is where it all comes down to, because many countries are just vaguely announcing targets which are very unlikely to be met. Look at the record of the G20 from 2015 to 2021. If most of them have not been able to meet the target, the modest targets of 2015 Paris Accord, what more ambitious target will they achieve? So I think what we are saying, our Indian position, what Prime Minister is emphasizing is, just get it done first and let us see the outcome on the ground. In India, we are showing the outcome on the ground. Our renewables, just look at that, there is an expectation, not 40%, even 60% renewable energy may happen by 2030. The pace at which we are investing in solar, wind, and nuclear and other non-fossil fuel based energy sources. So we are on track for a transformation in this country. And I think that's what we want to see elsewhere. So the clamor to have a so-called net zero target is meaningless because, just to give you one example, with due respect, Australia is a major partner of India, but Australia is one of the biggest fossil fuel producers and exporters in the world. China consumes a lot of fossil fuels and also builds major coal-based power plants all over the world. Now, finally, they're saying we'll stop exporting pollution and we'll stop building these coal-fired power plants abroad. If you look at individual countries, then they say by 2050 we'll become net zero. Is it really realistic what they're talking about? So it's not. I think many of these leaders are looking at a short-term vision. They are not going to be in power. Some of them will not even be alive by 2050 or 2060. So I think PM's vision is different. When India gives its word, we implement. Therefore, we will not give a word that is cheap. We will not give a word that is meaningless or simply a vague, commitment that nobody knows. Like Mark Twain used to say, in the long run, all of us are dead.
Yes.
Nothing matters. In the long run, nothing matters. So medium, as you said, medium and short is where action is needed. India is already taking action. We want the ones who are pointing fingers at us to show the action on the ground and then talk.
Absolutely. India has shown by way of action, both nationally as well as internationally, that it is committed to fighting climate change, but one shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the historical contributors need to commit themselves more than developing countries. Well, let's shift focus now to combating COVID-19. And Ambassador Puri, just day before yesterday, or I think it was yesterday, that a task force was constituted by the G20, and the communique says that the task force has been established for pandemic preparedness, prevention and response. The focus is on vaccinating 40% of the population in all countries by the end of this year, and by mid-2022 vaccinating 70% of the population, and also ensuring that there is adequate finance that is available for equitable access and affordable access to vaccines. Has India already shown why it is the pharmacy of the world? Has it lived up to its reputation by providing vaccines and providing all resources, including COVID, etc.? And is it a best practice that various countries are applauding today and perhaps should also replicate in whatever way they can?
Munmun, I'll answer the question. Let me just make one little point on this climate change business. It's not just a matter of taking decisions for 2050 or whenever else. What is going to happen is that they will set up a chain of actions, i.e. every several years you'll have to report what you did, there will be peer reviews and so on. So, it's not such a simple sort of a matter wriggling out. And especially for a country like India, which has a great deal of regard for multilateralism, where our national ethos is one, that when you take these commitments, you don't renege on them, you work on them, which is why these things are a little important. We are not the kind of country which, doesn't give due importance to the policy space, which all of this means. Now talking about the pandemic. Look, let's be very clear. India has the capacity to produce the largest amount of vaccines that any country in the world has got. And the world, in various ways, also as a result of what we have been saying in the past, has been counting on that, especially in terms of vaccine supplies to the poor developing world, which really don't have capacities to be able to manufacture them and to be able to use them. Now, the second wave really caused a rupture. And we were forced to be able to divert most of our actions in terms of what we can do domestically. But look, we bounced back. And we have now very clearly said we're going to get back into the business of taking up our role of being major producers of vaccines and supplying to the COVAX program, which in turn will see to it that vaccines get available to the world. You remember some months back, when many developed countries were talking in terms of reaching 50% of their population, even larger, we also were embarking on a large vaccination program. The DG of WHO got up and said that there were countries which had not even been able to reach the double figures, let alone that there were countries which had barely received any vaccines and which had no production ability. So I think that should be very clear to everyone that India has the capacities, India has the abilities, and frankly speaking, India is there to step up to it. We did have an issue, but we are bouncing back from that issue. We've done a remarkable job in terms of vaccination within India, and now our being the pharmacy, or rather the supplier of vaccines to the world, is something that will go ahead. The other issues that remain, IPR waivers, etc., they're contentious issues, they'll remain. But in terms of development cooperation and lending a solidarity and helping hand, we are certainly not going to be second to none. In fact, we will be in the lead.
Absolutely. Professor Cholia, would you say that the Indian interlocutors particularly did a wise job by ensuring, and if you go by G20 Sherpa, Piyush Goyal, who said that India has ensured that the text on mutual recognition of vaccine candidates and mutual recognition of vaccines by various countries has been included as part of the health paragraph in the G20 outcome document, which is yet to be unveiled, and not as something which is seen only in the context of facilitating international travel. So is it an intelligent thing that has been done by the Indian interlocutors to give this issue as much relevance and importance that this deserves?
Well, yeah, otherwise what we have is a patchwork. If each country individually decides whether Covishield is acceptable or not, or whether you have to undergo quarantines, and whether it's going to be very bad for economic recovery. In that sense, the two are linked. What we do with the vaccine equity and with the travel equity is linked to the economy, and we do want common standards. Once it is recognized by the WHO, countries should not be raising barriers. We've already had a bit of a battle with the UK over this, and we have come out successful. We made the point and we proved our point. So I think it's important that this is there, but also you see the supply bottlenecks. This is where Ambassador was mentioning. We can ramp up production with more financing and with removal of hurdles to raw materials and intermediate products through which our Serum Institute and others here in India can manufacture for the whole world. And this, there is the smaller, the Quad initiative is there for India to be able to manufacture 1 billion vaccines by next year and to give it out, on nominal basis or even for free to needy countries in the Indo-Pacific and in the developing world. But Quad is just 4 countries. We want a broader multilateral financing for it. I mean, you mentioned the World Bank and all of them are saying it, but they're not necessarily empowering the champion producer, which is India. So I think our goal should be to attract more financing to ramp up the scale of our production and to be able to meet the needs of the world. We are the most qualified one. I mean, nobody can come anywhere close in terms of our capacity, as Ambassador Puri was saying. We are a vaccine superpower. So at the same time, because of the urgency of and we can actually save the whole planet if we had 4 or 5 years time frame. But because the target is so ambitious, 70% of the world by mid 2022, how are you going to do it without India pumping out, and churning out a lot more than what we are right now? So I think the Europeans are there. The international financial institutions are all connected to the G20. The ones with the money and the financing should come forward. And Japan, of course, is already committed under Quad to support India. And we have already started some of our manufacturing through these plurilateral financing mechanisms. So I think this is the right time, and we do need financing. We do need investment in our pharmaceutical sector, and this is the right moment to be asking for it. We are not doing it out of selfish reasons, because if you don't equip us, if you don't finance us, if you don't strengthen our hand, then how do you expect these targets to be met, or how do you expect these global public goods, vaccines, COVID vaccines, to be available universally? And,
absolutely.
This is the big challenge. If they want equity, they should be promoting India, and that's the only way out.
Absolutely, and the task force that has been announced could be a step in that direction. And you very rightly said that India has stayed true to its tradition of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, meeting the needs of its people and helping out humanity in the larger sense. Well, Ambassador Puri, do you expect progress on faster approvals for vaccines? Because we know that there are vaccine makers all around the world, including in India. And what we require is faster approvals. We also require approvals in larger numbers, so that, it's not like there should be one approval in 2 months. If these vaccines are already meeting the parameters of safety, efficacy, immunogenicity, to use a scientific term, then they might as well, look at faster regulatory processes. Do you expect forward movement on this?
Munmun, first, let me make a point. COVID has demonstrated that when push comes to shove, regulators do move fast. Do note how regulators in the West, who are notoriously known for, taking their time, being doubly, triply sure of what has happened, what they did for the Pfizer vaccine, for Moderna, which are vaccines of a totally different kind. And look what others have done. So, our own regulator also has been fast, trying to do things in a different manner. This entire business of using emergency authorization to let vaccinations take place. So people have done things. But, on the other hand, I think the regulators are also under a certain amount of pressure that they can't do anything in terms of efficacy. Although trying to do many things simultaneously is a good idea that has been adopted. I'm afraid I must acknowledge the fact that Bharat Biotech and its application has not yet been able to go forward. And even now, we hear that the WHO has asked them for more paper. Look, paperwork, doing the research, this is par for the course. If you are in the business of doing vaccines, then you have to know where the protocols are and how things are. You can't just go about blaming the regulators, etc. Businesses are part of it. Yes, there are reasons why people do it. They favor somebody, they don't. But you knew that when you got into the business. So the question is, really of ramping yourself up. I'll tell you my own case. I've been double vaccinated with Covax. I am slated to go to Glasgow. I believe there is an exemption granted by the UK for those coming for the COP. But look at it otherwise. So I think we all owe it to us. Several of the Chinese vaccines are facing the same sets of issues. I don't know what is the situation with Sputnik from
Russia.
Russia. So, you know, these are things that should go forward. Regulators must realize that in this day and age where chances of pandemics, etc., has grown exponentially, if I may say so, the abilities to be able to produce drugs, to be able to produce vaccination needs to, you know, be such that they are able to roll their processes at a faster method without compromising on safety. Of course, that should be no doubt at all. But it can't be just a case of one after the other. You roll things, you do things better. And I think the WHO, national regulators, each and every one of them, they owe it to themselves, they owe it to their profession, and of course, they owe it to humanity.
Absolutely. So there are two important issues that we've covered so far in the first 1 hour, fighting climate change as well as ensuring that the world is protected from future pandemics and responding to the current pandemic effectively. I'll thank you, Ambassador Puri, for having joined us. Professor Cholia, we'll request you to stay on with us. We'll take a break at this point in time, a special broadcast on the 16th G20 Summit, which is underway. Today is day 1 of the summit in Rome. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is attending it. We'll tell you more on what's happening there after a short break. Stay tuned.